He stands alone at the edge of the municipal lot, a man in a dark wool coat, clutching a single map as the last light bleeds from the sky. His name was Alistair Vance. In 1887, he was one of the city's most respected cartographers, precise, rational, unshakable. But the night this photograph was taken, something had already gone wrong. Because the map in his hand didn't show the city as it was. It showed what the city refused to let anyone see. A place erased from every record, every plan, and yet still casting shadows. What Vance inherited wasn't just a map. It was an entry point to something the city buried long ago. And once he unfolded it, the unseen began to unfold him. The letter arrived with the unmarked Morning Post, wrapped in brown waxed paper and bound with twine. Alistair Vance hadn't spoken to his great-uncle in nearly 20 years. The old man had been a surveyor too eccentric, brilliant, and eventually dismissed from the Royal Cartographic Office for deliberate falsifications. Vance remembered the scandal only in fragments, whispered accusations, burned field notes, and a single line from his father. Some places are meant to stay uncharted. Inside the parcel were 3 items: a brass measuring compass, 2 cracked leather journals, and a rolled sheet of parchment sealed with a faded crimson crest. The map was of London, but it was wrong. The city's wards and thoroughfares were precisely inked, but near the South Railway junction, Vance saw a district he had never once recorded. 4 neat terraces and a narrow alley, tucked behind a soot-stained station that, officially, led nowhere. He laid the map beside the official registry charts in his study. Every measurement aligned perfectly, every curve and arch of the roadways matched, except that district. On the official record, a blank lot. On his great-uncle's map, a street with a name, Dunstow Row. Vance leaned closer. The handwriting was his uncle's sharp, deliberate. He told himself it was an old draft, a rejected proposal, a cartographer's error. But when he brought the parchment under the lamplight, he noticed something else. The ink shimmered faintly, not like ordinary pigment, but like something catching light from beneath the paper itself. And then, he heard it, a distant clanging like tram wheels striking cobblestone. It came not from outside, but from the map. The sound was faint at first, easy to dismiss as exhaustion. But as he stilled his breath, the noise grew clearer, rhythmic, patterned, like a tram slowing to a stop at a street that shouldn't exist. The flame in the lamp flickered. Vance turned. The shadows on the wall didn't match the room. The outline of window frames, chimneys, and narrow houses stretched across the wallpaper, shapes belonging not to his modest study, but to a neighborhood he'd never seen. And as the seconds dragged, those shadows shifted, as though cast by something alive and moving. He pulled the curtain aside. Outside, the street was quiet. London, in its ordinary rhythm, fog, gaslights, and distant carriages. But when he turned back to the wall, the shadows were still there. The journals offered no explanation, only brief, erratic entries. The houses remain, though no one remembers. To map it is to see it. Do not stand at the threshold after dark. Vance felt the weight of something he couldn't yet name. He refolded the map carefully, pressing the wax seal closed. But even as he locked it away in the cabinet, the faint sound of tram wheels didn't stop. That night, as he extinguished the lamps, he noticed something else. On the far wall of his room, near the skirting board, a thin line of light had appeared, as if cast from a narrow alley outside. Only, there was no alley outside. He told himself he would revisit the map in the morning. Rational explanations existed. They always did. He was a man of measurement, of distances and boundaries. But as he lay in bed, the sound beneath the floorboards began again. Tram wheels on cobblestones, rolling steadily closer. And in the dark, Alistair Vance understood the smallest, quietest truth. Whatever his great-uncle had mapped, it was no longer waiting to be found. The morning fog settled low over the municipal lot. Like a sheet of wool, Alistair Vance stood at its edge, boots sinking into soft, cold earth. This was the place. The blank space on every official city chart. To everyone else, it was just an undeveloped lot by the South Railway station, mud, weeds, and cracked stones. But Vance had measured London 100 times over. He knew every span of its streets, every stubborn inch of its cobbles, and this place didn't add up. He pressed the brass compass into the soil, set the tape between 2 fixed survey markers, and began to measure. Stone to stone, anchor to anchor, 312 feet. City records said 265. 47 feet of earth that shouldn't exist. The exact width of the missing block on his great-uncle's map. He checked again, and again. The numbers did not change. The more he measured, the less sense it made. It wasn't an error of ink or memory. Space itself was stretching silently, cleanly around something invisible. The wind shifted. A narrow gust cut through the lot, slicing against his coat. It wasn't the wide open wind of a field. It was concentrated, cold, like standing at the mouth of an alley. Vance lifted the compass. Its needle jerked violently, quivering toward the blank middle of the lot. No street, no path, just air. But the way the needle fought against his hand, it might as well have been pointing down a real road. To map it is to see it, his great-uncle had written. He tightened his grip. It's a misalignment, he muttered. A trick of iron deposits in the soil, nothing more. But the compass kept trembling, like it knew better. By midday, the fog had burned away. Clerks walked past the lot without glancing in. No one saw anything. To them, it was a forgotten patch of dirt. But to Vance, something pressed outward from the space like a lung slowly drawing breath. When the sun began to set, the real unease began. The adjacent bank's tall facade cast its shadow across the lot. Vance squinted as the last orange light fell behind the station, and the shadow stretched unnaturally far, elongating past the edge of the building's geometry. It should have stopped 30 feet short of the southern fence. Instead, it spilled over, creeping deeper across the ground like liquid ink, and then he saw them. In the stretched shadow, chimney outlines rose where no houses stood. Gabled roofs, thin windows, crooked pipes, perfect silhouettes of the missing terraces, and something else moved between them. At first, Vance thought it was a trick of dusk, but the shape didn't blur or fade like ordinary shadow play. It walked, slowly, precisely, step by step, his breath clouded in the evening air. He didn't dare move. The figure crossed the phantom street and disappeared into what should have been empty space. The shadow of a door swung closed behind it, though there was no door to close. The sound came next, a low, distant creak of hinges, the faint rattle of a carriage wheel turning over cobblestone. Vance's pulse thudded against his collar. He forced himself to record every detail in his field notebook: angle of shadow, direction of movement, the impossible length of the bank's facade. Writing steadied him. Measurement was language, and language was control. But as he wrote, he noticed the ink beginning to ripple faintly across the page, like water disturbed by a current he couldn't feel. Behind him, the breeze returned, narrower, colder. He turned slowly toward the empty air where the alley should have been. For the briefest moment, he felt something on his face, warm breath, inches away. Then it was gone. The shadows shrank as the last light vanished, leaving only the bare, silent lot. No footprints, no walls, nothing for a man of maps to hold onto. But the distance remained 312 feet, an extra 47 feet of London that no one but Alistair Vance could measure. And in that silence, he realized something far worse than error. He wasn't just mapping the invisible was mapping him back. The study smelled faintly of wax and old paper, a scent Alistair Vance had always found comforting. But that night, it felt different, sharper, as though the air itself was listening. He unrolled the map onto his drafting table and struck a match, letting the lamplight settle across its surface. The inked lines of London gleamed softly, the way oil sometimes does, when the surface beneath is still wet. Vance leaned in closer, pulling a magnifying lens from its wooden case. His breath fogged the glass as he inspected the margins of the map, the thin, unmarked borders most cartographers used for notations. That's when he saw it, pressed so fine it was nearly invisible. Carved into the fiber of the parchment itself, rather than written on top, were words: "The city will correct my error. Do not let them be seen." The script was unmistakable, his great-uncle's hand. Vance's throat tightened. He tilted the lens, watching how the letters caught the light, at certain angles, and vanished at others. It wasn't an annotation meant to be read casually. It was hidden almost as if it wasn't written for another person at all, but for the map itself. He moved the lamp closer. The district at the Southern Railway junction, the one that didn't exist, seemed darker now. The ink on the terraced houses looked thicker than he remembered. Not dry, not fixed, wet, Vance touched the corner of a blot with his blade. The steel came away stained black. Then it happened. In the printed window of one of those inked houses, a faint pulse of light flickered no bigger than a lantern wick. He froze. The light flared again, soft but deliberate, as if someone inside the drawing had just lit a lamp. Vance's heart gave a single, solid thud. He set the blade down carefully and stepped back. He wasn't tired. He wasn't imagining it. The map was changing. He flipped through his uncle's journals, searching for context. Many pages were ruined with damp, but scattered notes stood out. The line must not touch the living streets. Do not mark their doors. Once lit, they do not go dark. By midnight, the lamplight in the inked district burned steadily, and the map, his great-uncle's map, was no longer a static object. He woke at dawn to the sound of something scratching against paper. Not outside, not in the street. Inside his study, Vance sat upright, pulse hammering. The map lay where he'd left it, but the southern margin had thickened. The ink darker, the lines crisp. He leaned over and felt the bottom of his stomach drop. A figure now stood in the alleyway on the map. A man inked black, faceless, perfectly centered, in the space between the terraced houses. It hadn't been there the night before. The figure wasn't merely drawn. Its edges seemed to ripple, like a reflection in disturbed water. He tried to scrape at it lightly with the tip of a drafting blade, but the ink resisted, not soaked into the parchment, but part of it, fused. Vance pulled out the official city plans, the untouched registry maps filed with the Cartographic office. He'd locked them in a cabinet the previous night. The lock was still intact, but when he unrolled the master plan of South London, his breath caught in his throat. The missing block Dunstow Row was there, inked cleanly, measured precisely, drawn with his own technical hand. His signature rested at the bottom corner, but he had no memory of adding it. The compass on his desk began to tremble again, faintly at first, then harder, the needle twitching toward the southern lot. Even though he was miles from it, the journals sat open beside it, one page scrawled in uneven, hurried handwriting. I drew it once, and it drew me back. Vance felt the hair at the back of his neck rise. He could almost sense the map, waiting, listening. The figure in the alley, ink still, yet alive in some quiet way, seemed to lean closer the longer he stared at it. His rational mind told him to burn it, to lock the cabinets, to walk out and never return. But the cartographer in him, the man of margins and measurements, knew something irreversible had already happened. The city had accepted the map's correction, and worse, so had he. In the quiet of his study, the scratching began again, but this time, it wasn't coming from the paper. It was coming from inside the walls. The rain had stopped hours ago, but fog still clung to the railway yard like something with a pulse. Alistair Vance moved through it in silence, compass clenched in one hand, the other buried in the pocket of his coat where the map rested, warm, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. He followed the coordinates exactly as they were drawn, 32 paces south of the junction, 17 east, then 5 down a narrow path that most Londoners walked past, without ever noticing. The night was quiet, thick with the smell of iron and damp brick. Then he saw it, a rusted iron gate, half swallowed by a curtain of ivy. No signage, no address, no reason for it to be there, just like the map had promised. Vance ran his fingers along the lock. It wasn't locked. The gate creaked open with the smallest push, releasing a gust of cold, narrow wind, the kind that doesn't belong in open space, only in enclosed streets. On the other side stood a solid brick wall, 12 feet high, featureless. This was where the map ended. His breath left in a long cloud as he checked the coordinates again. Every line, every figure matched. Yet there was nothing but wall. But the compass needle trembled violently now, spinning in small jerks and then fixing itself toward the bricks. Not around them, through them. The fog deepened, settling low against the ground. Something changed in the air, a subtle flex, like canvas being stretched. The wall in front of him rippled. At first, it was faint, like heat, rising from a road. Then the motion thickened, the bricks softening into a slow liquid wave. The iron gate groaned behind him, as if reacting to the shift. Vance didn't move. He watched as outlines emerged, door frames, lintels, roof edges. The wall was no longer a wall. It was a curtain being drawn back. 4 terraced houses stood before him, their chimneys crooked and tall, their windows faintly lit with the thin glow of candlelight. Every house exactly as the map had drawn them line for line. A street long erased, now breathing again. The railway station behind him fell silent. Even the distant rattle of carriages on the main street vanished, leaving only the faint tock, tock, tock of something knocking. Vance strained to locate it. The sound came from inside the houses, rhythmic, slow, not frantic like someone escaping, measured, like someone expecting him. His rational mind screamed to leave to document, not to trespass. But the air was pulling him forward, folding around him like fabric closing behind a needle. His boots crossed the threshold between fog and stone. The instant his foot landed on the invisible cobblestones, the world tilted not violently, but cleanly, like a page turning. The night air no longer smelled of the station. It smelled of coal, old iron, and something faintly sweet, like preserved wood and oil lamps. The sound of the railway was gone entirely. Behind him, the fog hung like a wall. Ahead, the knocking stopped. A door opened the second house on the left. No one stood in the doorway. Just the flicker of candlelight on faded wallpaper and a narrow hallway that seemed too long for the size of the house. The compass in his coat pocket stopped trembling. The needle was steady now, pointing straight ahead. Vance didn't need to look at the map to know. He wasn't standing in London anymore. He was standing on it. On the margin, his great-uncle had carved open. The city hadn't forgotten this place. It had buried it. And now, as the door's hinges creaked wider, something inside the house exhaled. He took a breath that felt too loud in the silence. Then, he stepped in. The door closed behind Alistair Vance without a sound. No gust of air, no click of a latch, just silence heavy and absolute. The house smelled of damp timber and old ink. Not rot, not decay. It was the scent of a place preserved, held still in some pocket of time. The hallway stretched longer than the house could possibly allow, lined with pale green wallpaper and gas sconces that hissed faintly without flame. Everything was intact. A coat hung on the peg by the door, the fabric soft and warm, as if it had just been taken off. A single teacup sat on the console table, still faintly steaming, and on the hall's narrow sideboard, a ledger lay open. His great-uncle's handwriting filled the page in its precise, deliberate script. Vance leaned closer. The ink was black and wet, the final line trailing off mid-sentence. The city demands a keeper, one to hold its shape, one to stand where I once. The line ended there. No blot, no smudge, just absence, like the pen had been pulled away mid-breath. Vance's throat tightened. The air in the hallway thickened, making each inhale feel as though it had to be carved through. He stepped back toward the door, reached for the handle. It wasn't there. Where the doorway should have been, there was only the wallpaper, pale green, seamless. The outside world was gone. His pulse thundered in his ears. He pressed both hands against the wall. It was solid, cold, no hidden latch, no seam, only faint vibrations beneath the surface, like something breathing on the other side. A whisper drifted down the hallway, not from a single direction, from the walls themselves. Someone must hold the map. Vance spun. The sconces along the corridor flickered, though no flame burned in them. A door creaked open at the far end. The same rhythmic toke, toke, toke he'd heard outside echoed through the floorboards. This time, it wasn't distant. It was beneath him. He moved forward slowly, boots making no sound on the floorboards. The house was entirely still, but the air pressed closer with each step, as though the hallway were narrowing, folding inward around him. The first room on the left was a study. His uncle's study. He recognized it from an old photograph, a high-backed chair, surveyor's instruments arranged with obsessive precision, a drafting table scarred with blade marks. A map was laid out on the table. His map, the same parchment, same crimson seal, but the southern margin now held 5 names, etched into it in identical script, one after another. 4 were old. The 5th, Alistair Vance. His hand trembled as he touched the ink. It was wet, fresh. The whisper came again. The city will correct its error. He stumbled back, heart hammering against his ribs, and turned toward where the hallway had been. But the room no longer had edges. The walls were bending softly, like paper soaking through with water. The ceiling sagged slightly, lanterns tilting as though gravity itself was being rewritten around him. On the far wall, where there had been wallpaper, faint outlines emerged, 4 silhouettes, ink black and still. They stood shoulder to shoulder, head to head, faceless. He knew without being told that these were the others, the ones who came before, the ones who stayed. Vance clutched his compass, but the brass was cold, unyielding. The needle no longer moved. It was fixed, pointing straight down. The whisper deepened now, layering over itself. We'd not, dozens of voices. Men, women, some old, some new, all saying the same thing. Someone must hold the map. Vance lunged for the door to the hallway, but the study had no door anymore. The room had folded into itself, ceiling and walls sliding inward like pages closing. The compass snapped in his hand. Something pressed lightly against his back. Not a shove, just a presence. Cold, patient, guiding. His legs moved on their own, carrying him toward the drafting table. He tried to resist one last time, but the house was no longer a house. It was geometry given hunger. A chair scraped against the floor. The ink bottle trembled. A quill rolled into his hand. Saturday. The parchment southern margin glistened wet beneath the flickering sconces. His name was already there, but space remained empty, lines stretching forward, waiting. His fingers gripped the quill, and without a single conscious thought, Alistair Vance began to draw. At dawn, the municipal lot was quiet again. The railway yard bustled as it always had. Clerks passed by, carts rolled over the stones, and the lot behind the ivy-covered gate was empty. City workers clearing debris. Near the fence, unearthed something small and metallic from the dirt. A brass compass, old, polished by use. Its needle twitched faintly toward nowhere. That same morning, at the Royal Cartographic Office, a clerk opened an archival drawer to file a report and found a map he swore hadn't been there the day before. The crimson wax was unbroken, and at the bottom margin, beneath the faded names of 4 other men, was a 5th, Alistair Vance. The ink was still wet. The city had corrected its geometry, and the unseen block had found its new cartographer.